Hello, welcome to this video. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to use trim sheets within Unity using two separate UV channels. So we can have one for the trim sheet and one for kind of overlaying details on the top, such as this sort of emission ring and this kind of grunge map that goes over the top. And you can see here in the kind of instance that we've got a grunge strength, which changes the kind of strength of the grunge on the barrel. We can make it tile to make it more detailed or less detailed. We can control the emission intensity of this ring on top. And finally, if we move the barrel, you can see that the grunge map will move in kind of world space. So that means as we dot these barrels around, the grunge will be kind of different and dependent on kind of each barrel. Move them over. We've got our grunge here. And finally, if I just undo all of this, I'll very quickly go over how to make it so the emission from said barrel, the emission from the barrels actually casts light into the scene on a baked light map. Yeah, let's just jump straight into it. This is the trim sheet I used for this example. I got it on Sketchfab. I'll put the link in the description below. You just want to hit download the 3D model, and then just unpack that, unzip it, and you can get the textures out of it. So the first thing you want to do is you want to bring in a plane, and this is going to be our, we can get our trim sheet set up on this just to make sure it's working, and then we can make the barrel. So for this, let's just, going to make a new shader. I'm just going to call this trim sheet 2. And make sure you've got the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which you can do under Edit Preferences Add-ons and just search for Node Wrangler. I'm going to click the Principled BSDF and then press Ctrl-Shift-T to bring up our file view. And I'm going to select all of these images and then click Principled Texture Setup. And that's not going to work. I've just started a new scene. Let's try that again. So we'll bring in a plane, get up the shader editor, make a new material, Ctrl-Shift-T, modular wall, textures, select all our textures. There we go. And that's brought in all of our textures and it's set it up just how we need it. We can go over to material preview and we can see our plane here with our trim sheet on it. And you can see that it's got this 3D effect even though it is just a flat plane. So before I go any further, I'll just give a quick explanation as what a trim sheet is. So if we open up our UV editor here, and bring up kind of this image. So you can see that this image has got a strip of like panels, it's got this brass kind of copper wiring, it's got this kind of section which is quite nice, and it's got these panels with the screws on them. And if you look at the normal map for this, each area is clearly defined and it's got some height data, and this corresponds to this here. And we can use this to make low poly geometry have quite specific trim sheets, and it just means that we're not having to do high poly assets for every single item. So if I was doing a crate and a barrel and I knew they'd have shared things like the pipes and these panels, I could just do the crate and the barrel using the one texture instead of making a separate barrel and a separate crate high poly and then baking those maps to their own individual texture sets. And this also helps with things like game engines where we can reduce the kind of use of textures and keep the file sizes low, keep memory consumption low, and just make it a lot more optimized by using this kind of technique. And finally, for independent developers, obviously it's a lot quicker it's just quicker to do this, to do it this way. That might not make a lot of sense to people if you're new to trim sheets, but you'll see exactly how it works in just a second. So we've got our plane, we've got our material set up. I know that's all working nicely. I'm just going to drag this over here. I'm going to go over to make sure I'm still in the UV editor. And I'm going to delete our plane, and then I will add in a cylinder. I'm going to go into front view, and we'll just scale this down, scale it up there. And then do S, Shift Z, Alt Control just to get more of a barrel kind of shape. And I'm just going to Control A and apply the scale to that just to make sure we've got the scale right. And then I will go over to the material tab, and then I will add in our trim material to it. So I'll go over to render mode. You can see here that it's all just a bit of a mess at the minute. I'm just going to shade that smooth, come over here to our normals, click auto smooth. So we can see at the minute our UVs, we've got this row of UVs, which is the barrel all the way around. You can see as I move it around, it kind of shows the barrel in different places. And then we've also got the tops, which are these. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to go back to solid mode, and I'm going to just make the barrel look kind of a bit of a nicer shape. So I'm going to grab the top and bottom faces. I'm going to press Control B to bevel. I'll chamfer it like this, and then I'll give it a kind of, with the scroll wheel, give it a nice smooth bevel. Got a cylinder like that. Now on the top, I'm going to inset these faces. I'm just going to extrude them inwards. So I'm going to press E and then right click to kind of leave them where they were. I'm going to press S and Z and just snap them in slightly like this. Okay, so now we need to make geometry to map to our barrel here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just select everything and just drag the UVs off here. And I'm going to put a seam just down the back here. So I'm going to select this back edge loop. I did that prior. Alt click the edge loop, right click, mark seam. And we want to mark, and in face select mode, I'm going to select both of these faces, go to edge mode, mark those seams as well. So now, you don't need to make seams for everything. You can just select kind of these edge loops, and then you could press U and just unwrap just those. And then over in the UV editor, I'm going to press N, and I'm going to use an add-on called UV Squares. This is a free add-on. You can download it for free over on GitHub. I'll make sure this is linked in the description below as well. What UV Squares lets us to do is, we've got this obviously round shape, but we want it to be flat and square to match to our trim sheet here. So I'm just going to click to grid by shape, and that's just going to flatten out our grid here. Oh. And I'm just going to go over to material mode just so we can see what happens here. So we've got our ring here. And what I want to do is I want to map it to this brass area. So I'm going to press S and Y to shrink that down. S, Y, shrink that down a bit more. Scale it up on the Y again a little bit. And then SX, and just bring this in. SX, scale up so it matches, kind of it goes edge to edge. There we go. We can see now our top band has got this pipe on it. If we want to, we could press SY, kind of take a bit more of the black that's either side of it in. I think for now that'll do. Well, I've been flipped upside down there. I was looking at it from underneath. What I am going to do, so I'm just going to do the same again for this row of faces. I'm going to get all of those, and the same. I'm going to press U, unwrap to grid by shape, R90. And I'm just going to bring this down over here to the trim sheet, press S, Y, scale it in, SX, scale it in. Okay, so we've got our metal barrel, kind of the loop there. And now what I want is, I want in the middle somewhere, I want to get this strip of faces. So I put an edge loop in by pressing Ctrl R, scroll up, and then I've got these faces here. I'm going to press U and unwrap. R90, and then I'm just going to bring these over here. They should fit kind of quite perfectly there. So we've got this strip of detail here. I think I just need to move these up slightly. Okay, so now I'm going to get the top here again. You unwrap, and I'm going to put this to be kind of these tiles here. I'm just going to make sure they get the kind of the beveled edges in like that. So we've got our panels. If we wanted to, we could scale them up on the X to make them bigger panels or stretch them out, but I'm just going to leave them like that for the sake of this. And then with our ring of panels here, I'm going to press U, unwrap, A, R90, and then I'm going to bring this over here, and I'm scaling this up on the Y. So now we've got this panel here, and then I'm going to get the ring of inner faces on both sides. U, unwrap, and we can actually stack these on top of each other. So shift them over, grab them all, R90, and then I'm going to put them here, I think. Scale them up. So that's just this inner lip here. And then for the top and bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring them over, scale them down, and I'm just going to put them kind of, I'll put them on top of each other, and then just scale them down just so they fit on this plain bit here. So now you can see that we've got this plain kind of top barrel top. And I'm not a massive fan of this inner bit. So I'm just going to get those edge loops. Let's see, could always move them down here, get some more of the metal work in. Does that look okay? Okay, so I think that looks okay, and just for the purposes of the demonstration, it doesn't really matter too much. So you can see that we've got our barrel here, and this was so much quicker than making sort of a high poly version, because you can imagine a world where we did this not with a trim sheet. And instead we had our barrel, and then we extruded this out slightly, and then we had to bevel, extrude this out slightly, and then we grabbed these, then we beveled them, and then we grabbed sort of each individual vases, and we had to like inset them, and then extrude them out, and then bevel those, and then do all of this detail work with booleans, and then make the pipes and wrap them around, and then bake that to this object anyway. Whereas with our trim sheet, and this isn't even one of the best trim sheets I've seen, there are others. This is quite cartoony, it's not hyper realistic, but I mean for this it works quite well. And so you can see how quick I made this barrel just from this one trim sheet. Sorry, I need to save that in a sec. So, and I mean, we could do the same thing. We could move that over. Now we could get a crate. Make a crate the same size. Let's make sure the scale's applied. Make sure we bevel the edges. Could inset all of these faces. Bring them in. Extrude them inwards. Got our faces here, so then we could, I don't know, we could unwrap this. Just put a seam in here, mark seam, and then we could have unwrapped this. Grid by shape, scale it down, scale it up, give our barrel the trim material. And we've got this pipe detailing going round. Put the face just over here somewhere. You can see that it's just such a quicker way of working, but anyway, that's not... So you can go kind of crazy with these trim sheets. If you want a tutorial on how to make trim sheets, then let me know in the comments and I'll do a tutorial on how to actually make your own trim sheets. But for now, we've got our barrel here, we've got our trim sheet, so we can save this out. And the first thing you want to do before you save it, if you go onto the Unity hub, make a new project. I'm going to do this through the HDRP. You could do it through URP, but the shader graph may be slightly different depending on what nodes are available in the URP. The shader I'm going to show you, I made it in HDRP, so if you're going to use it, I'd probably suggest making a new project there. And then that'll bring you into, that's going to bring you into kind of this default HDRP scene. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to delete all of these barrels because it'll get confusing. Let's delete that. So I'm just going to save this object, make sure it's in the center of your scene. I'm just going to save it, and I'm going to save it in a new folder within my Unity projects HDRP, which is this project here. Just going to make a new folder called tutorial. I'm going to call this tutorial barrel. And I'm just going to save it as a blend file directly in my Unity project. Actually, before we save it, I almost forgot one of the most important things. We want to come over to the vertex, the object data properties tab here, and underneath UV maps, we need to add 3 UV maps in. And the first one I'm just going to call UV0. The middle one I'm going to call UV1. This one I'm going to call UV2. And this one I'm going to call UV3. So if I click the little camera next to the UV3, it's going to render the UV layout for those. Because I made it in, because we only had one when I unwrapped it, it copies that to all of the other ones. The reason we have to make 3 extra ones is because Unity uses these 2 channels for global illumination and baked light maps and stuff, so we can't use those within Unity. We need the 4th slot here. We need to fill those in so they're there for the model, and we can put our trim sheet UVs here on UV3. Now, if I go back over to UV0, click the camera, and then for this one, I'm just going to do a traditional unwrap. So I'm just going to press U, press unwrap, and then I'm going to get this, and I'm just going to grid by shape. And we'll do UV pack islands. Just going to a bit more of a margin, move that over. So now you can see that it's gone all messed up because the UV here is completely wrong for the trim sheet. But if we click our UV channel here, we click the little camera, go back in, you can see that this is maintained our trim sheet UVs. And this is kind of the messed up UV. So now if I hit save, or if you haven't saved it yet, go to File, Save As, save it just directly in your project folder. Over in Unity, we'll let this compile. So we'll find our blend file here. I'm just going to drag it into the world just so we can see it. You can see that at the minute, it's using the UV channel 01. It's using UV0 as its UVs. What we want to do is we can come over here to our barrel, and in the inspector, I just want to make sure there's no rig attached, there's no animation because it's just a static object. Then I'm going to click Generate Light Map UVs, and that's going to automatically generate the light map UVs in those other UV channels which we aren't using. And I'm just going to hit Apply. Okay, so we've got a barrel. It looks all broken and wrong. That's fine. We're going to fix that in just a second. The next thing you want to do is you want to bring in the texture maps for your trim sheet, so we can just drag them in to the project here. And for our normal map, just make sure that's flagged as a normal map. We've got our barrel and we've got our textures. So now we can open up our, we can make a new shader graph. So now we can make a new shader in shader graph. So I'm just gonna right click, go to create shader, HDRP, and then we'll just do a lit shader graph. And we'll call, I'm just gonna call this one tutorial barrel. And I'm going to open this up. Okay, so what we want to do is, first of all, let's get our trim sheet texture working, so we can see that within Unity. So I'm just going to create a node. It's going to be a sample texture 2D node. And we could do these as properties if we want to swap the trim sheets out, but just to keep it simple, I'm just going to drag the textures directly in. So there's our modular wall. And you can see UV 0 here. We want to change that to UV 3, which we know, which back in Blender, that's UV 3. That's our trim sheet UVs. So we'll swap that to UV 3. And we can plug this into the base color. And down here in this main preview, I'm just going to right click, go to custom mesh. And I'm going to find the, what's it called, cylinder. I'm going to right click, custom mesh, and just type in cylinder. And we've got our cylinder mesh here, so we can see our barrel kind of in this little preview. So I'm going to select our sample texture 2D and press Control D and just drag this down. And for this one, this will be the normal map. So we'll drag the normal map in. That can go into the normal slot. And under type, we'll choose normal. Then we'll do a, just going to collapse that and collapse this just to keep it a bit more organized. Then I'm going to Control D, drag in our metallic map, which I believe is that one. And we'll drag that into metallic. And then finally, we're going to press Control D, bring this over, and we're going to drag in our roughness map. Oh no, not finally, we've got one more actually, but we're going to bring in our roughness map. Make sure that's default. And then we're going to drag out from there and we're going to type in invert colors. And I'm going to invert all of the red, green, blue channels and we'll put this into the smoothness map. That's because this is a roughness map. Unity is using a smoothness map, and a roughness and smoothness map are complete opposite. So anything black here needs to be white to get the same effect, which we can see up here. And then we've got our oh no, this is our metallic map, which means we drag our metallic map up here. So that's our metallic map, and then we have a emission map, which we're not going to use, and we've got an AO map, which just Control D, and we can drop our ambient occlusion map into this, and then put that into ambient occlusion. That was a little bit messy, but you can see what I've done. So we've got our smoothness map, we've got our AO map, we've got our metallic map, our normal map, and our base color map. So if I just save this asset, right click, create, I'm going to right click the shader graph sort of asset there, right click, create, material. I'm going to call this the tut barrel. I'm just going to call this the tut barrel instance. Now if we drag this onto our barrel, you can see that there's our barrel. Using the trim sheet texture, it doesn't look amazing. Let's see why that is. I think it might be our normal. I'm going to swap that back to be a normal map, and I'm going to uncheck normal. I'm going to put that back to default up there. Will that fix that? Modular wall, default, tangent. Okay, I'm not sure why that's red. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to drag the normal map just into the kind of graph, and then I'll just plug that into normal. And then make sure this is set to UV3. We save the asset. Go over. Okay, that looks a little better. Okay, so there we've got our barrel. It's quite shiny. What we could do is with our roughness map here, which we've turned into a smoothness map. After our invert colors, we could add in a clamp node, which is just like a color ramp in Blender. We can plug this in. Let that compile. So we've got our clamp node here. We could maybe just bump up, tone down, sorry, the rough part. So we'll just put 0.25 in all of these. So that's going to make anything that was completely sort of mega shiny just not as reflective. And then we can tone down the kind of smoothness here. We save that asset. Have a look. There you go. Our barrel is a lot kind of nicer to look at now. So if you were just interested in how to get trim sheets working in Unity, then that's kind of how you do it. If you're just interested in the trim sheets and you don't want to do anything fancy on top of that, you can even skip this step and just have them in the UV slot 1. But we're going to just take this a bit further and have that tileable kind of grunge over the top of it using the other UV channel. So if we just go back to our barrel here, and I'm just going to collapse all of these down just to make them a bit. Just going to collapse all of these down just to make them a bit more organized. Just going to drag these just kind of down here and out of the way. And we could even right click, group the selection, and just call this our trim sheet sort of area. Drag these out of the way. And what we are going to want to do is we're going to want to keep track of our roughness map, because that's where we're going to add in our grunge. So I'm just going to make a, create a node up here, and I'm going to make a preview node. I'm just going to add our smoothness map into the preview node and then back into the smoothness, and that's just going to help redirect that node up here, just so we can get access to it from up here. We don't have to keep on coming down here and dragging it up. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is just to show you kind of how we can implement the other UV channel, which is the full kind of the proper unmapped channel, this one. This one here, so we've got our barrel, it's just fully unwrapped, and then we've got our the tops and bottoms here. And if we want to, what we could do is just so this tiles on its y-axis. So this tiles across the seam. If we use a tiling texture, we can just do that. So kind of edge to edge, it fills the UV sort of space. And I'm just going to press Ctrl S to save that. Go back into Unity. Okay, so that shouldn't have changed anything. It's just, it'll just adjusted those UVs automatically. So here in Photoshop, I've made an emission map, which is just black with white over kind of the UV. So this is the one from earlier. We'll have to remake one here. So what I did for this is you can export UV layouts here by selecting everything and then going to image, UVs, and then export UV layout, and then you can save it as an image. What I find quicker for just quick and dirty stuff like this is just on a Windows computer, you can press Shift Windows key and S, and which brings up the snip and sketch tool. You can just drag out, try and be as accurate as possible and get the full square, and then come back over into Photoshop, just Control V, and then just scale this up to match your square texture. This is just 1024 by 1024. So then I made two ellipses. Drag that over and get that in there. And then lastly, we want to make it black underneath it. So now this is going to act as an emission map, and it'll let us put an emissive kind of ring on the top and bottom of the barrel. So I'm just going to save this as a PNG just into our project folder. Call this tutorial emission map. That should appear here. Tutorial emission map. We can just drag this in. And then we want to take that into an emission node, and we can drag out from here, get a multiply, drag this into the color. Make sure our sample texture here is using UV0. Press the plus, choose color, and we'll call this emission color. Set this by default to sort of an orangey color, whatever you want. And we'll drag this into the multiply, drag this into the emission, and then we want to make an intensity. In our emission color, we just want to put mode, change that to HDR, and then drag the intensity up. And then we can press the plus, make a float, and call this emission intensity. Just set that to a default of 1 for now, and then we can drag that in, plug that into our intensity here. Drag that into our emission. If we save this, go back to our scene, so you can see that our barrel now, as well as the tile map, which is using UV3, we're using the unwrapped top and the bottom to put this little emissive ring in. It doesn't look great because of it's not very bright here, so this is where we can bump up our emission sort of intensity to control it, and we can also control the color from here as well if we wanted to do something a bit more funky. And you can see that that's on the bottom and the top as well. And a good thing about this as well is it will contribute to global illumination, so the floor will be able to get a pink bit of glow, and you can do that by marking this as static. If it's never going to move, if this barrel is just a piece of scenery, you can mark it as static, and then the floor will get a bit of a pink glow on it. So I'll do that for that one. Press Control D, and I'm just going to duplicate this just so we can see kind of the next kind of step. I'm just going to bring that up. So we've got our two barrels here. So if we want to put something over the top of these, again, that ends up being quite simple. So let's put a bit of grunge over the top of it. So I'll put this link in the description below. There's a free 512 by 512 grunge texture, which you can get here on textures.com. That'll just go into your downloads folder. And go back over to our assets, and you can just drag it into the scene. I've already got it here in this folder, but you just drag it into whichever folder you want. And then back over in the shader graph, what we want to do is just move this kind of down here and out of the way. Bring this over here. So I'm going to drag our grunge map in. Now for this one, the first thing I tried, and I'll show you kind of the issue I was having. If we get a position node, change this to absolute world. Drag that into a tiling and offset node. We can use UV slot 0, have our tiling, and then got our offset here. And if I bring the out into the UV slot, and then make a new vector 2 called Grunge Tiling, and just give this a default of 1 and 1. Bring that in, drag that in there. I'm going to bring this out here and call this a get a multiply. We can create a float up here, and we'll call this Grunge Strength. Set that to the value of 1, and I'm actually going to set this to a slider with a value of 1. Sorry, with a value of 0, but with a minimum of 1 and a plus of 1. Drag our grunge strength in, plug it in there. And now from our previous roughness map or smoothness map, we can do an add B. Drag out from our multiply map, drag that into the A, and then finally drag this into smoothness. And we'll let that shader compile. So it should be done. So if we click save, go over into our asset here, and go on to the instance of the material. We've got our no, that's the old one. Go to the instance material here. We've got our grunge strength here, so we can bring that up, and this is going to control that kind of that grunge map. We can also tile it on the kind of X and Y if we want. And control our grunge strength. We've got a tutorial barrel here, so we can, holding that shift, we can just get a bit of finer control, just to implement a bit of kind of variation. And now if we move our barrels along, you can see that that grunge will kind of change depending on the world. And for barrels, it's probably less of an issue. But you can imagine that if we had a wall and we want to break up the variation on the wall, that'd be quite good because it would kind of tile across the walls. So now they're marked as static, and if we go over to lighting, we can hit generate lighting. That's going to bake our light in. Okay, before you waste time trying to bake the emission, I forgot that you've got to scroll down here to advanced options and hit baked emission. And now if we bake our light in, you should see that this emission should cast a bit of glow onto the ground. So there you can see that we've got our barrel on the ground and the light is kind of cast down onto the floor. Now, because we marked them as static, that means that if we move them, that light is just saved onto an image on the ground. So it kind of has to stay there now. Obviously, if you move it, you can just rebake, and it's not a big deal. But if you want to change the color, again, you'd have to rebake. So that's kind of how that emission can kind of give a nice sort of effect out onto the ground. You can see here that there's some light leaking through from the one on the bottom. So yeah, there you have it. Different ways of using trim sheets within Unity and kind of get them into Blender and get them all set up within Shader Graph. Using two kind of UV sets, so you can have tileable kind of stuff over the top of them to kind of break up the repetition and kind of make each thing unique, even though it is using a trim sheet. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, it'd be great if you could like the video down below and subscribe if you want to see more content from the channel like this. And like I said, if you want to learn more about trim sheets and how to create your own, there is already great stuff out there on YouTube. If you want me to cover that here, make sure to let me know below and subscribe to see that content. As always, the project file, including the textures and the trim sheet and all the files, will be over on my Patreon, which is linked in the description below. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!